Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Here is your harbor of the soul. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story conquered. When I awoke, my first thought was that I should have brushed my teeth the night before. My mouth was sticky with tar and the filth of sleep. I opened and closed my jaw regretfully, smacking my tongue. As I did so, that was when I noticed the bump that had formed on the roof of my mouth. I chalked it up to poor dental hygiene and tried to push it from my mind. But, as is so often the case when we try to ignore something, the bump kept interposing itself on my thoughts. My tongue would touch the welt of its own accord, morbid fascination overpowering self-control by nightfall. It had neither reduced in size nor become any easier to ignore, so I took a closer look, shining a flashlight at a mirror. I was able to put a face to the annoyance. It was, as I'd surmised, little more than a red bump on the roof of my mouth. It was smaller than it felt and reminded me of nothing so much as a zit. The idea repulsed me, but lacking a better explanation. This is what I regarded it as. The damned thing kept me up at night and distracted me during the day. While seeming to grow ever larger, it took on a whitish hue, and seemed to be filling with some fluid mucus perhaps, though I could think of it only as pus. After the third day, I'd had enough reaching my fingers into my mouth. I felt around for the bump. It was slimy, and seemed to slide from my probing. But I eventually seized it between two nails and squeezed, until the membrane burst. There was an awful foulness in my mouth, like decay, and I spat and rinsed it away as best I could. A portion of the blister's contents had stuck to my forefinger, and I saw it was a cloudy, murky white stained by an off-yellow, more a gel than a liquid. I wiped it off in disgust at what had been pooling in my mouth. Less than a month later, it returned the same spot, had swollen up during the night, and it looked whiter than ever, with bare redness at its inflamed edges. There was no pain, just a curious numbness, and I disposed of it as I had the first, still unable to get past the zit comparison. I wondered if maybe I wasn't doing myself some harm by not allowing it to heal on its own. When it returned in a couple weeks, I resolved to just let it be. I scrubbed my mouth day and night, but the canker grew. My tongue touched it in horrified disgust, but still I restrained myself. When it had nearly tripled its original size, my resolve crumbled. I got the flashlight once more and yawned wide into the mirror. I found the bump had become a hemisphere, nearly an inch long. It was pasty white except for where veins throbbed across it. The membrane was taut with the ooze within, and at its center there was a black dot. As I lowered the flashlight, the mirror showed me that the dot grew larger as the light receded, and I had to choke back the bile that rose to my lips. I took the sharpest knife I had and stabbed the eye growing in my mouth, feeling only numbness as it, staring silently at me, burst. The second story, malediction of sapience. Mankind has long contented itself with the harsh realities of a hostile and imperfect world, believing each in their own way that paradise would come to them. Some men worked for the promise of a better tomorrow. Some put their hopes in religion, and yet others actively worked to shape the world into their own version of perfection. But these men have been blind to one very unsettling realization. A realization that came upon a man named Jeffrey J. Armain one night. A revelation, which we will discuss shortly, did not come out of thin air, as many people believe epiphanies derive from. Rather, it had slowly been taking shape in Jeff's mind over the many years. It was not until, during an impassioned theological debate with friends, he vocalized the concept and its enormity fell on him like a gut-churning sickness. Conversation stopped, and the men in the room stared blankly at Geoffrey, as if simultaneously daring him to repeat himself, and wishing intensely that he would not. Geoffrey politely excused himself from the room, and spent the next 2 months in seclusion. At the end of this period, he had written a manuscript based around his idea. It would be comforting to say that this document is destroyed, but I fear that I can make no such claim with any assurance of veracity. In the meantime, Jeff began showing his book to his peers, trying to generate critical responses, but no matter who he tried, the results were always the same. His reader looked on his idea with skepticism, then doubt, then fear, and finally, grim acceptance. They left, older and sadder than they had been. Geoffrey J. Armain took notice of this trend and grew quite suspicious of his idea. At first, he had believed the idea to be his own, the product of his rational inquiry into the nature of humanity. But now, more and more, Jeff felt alienated from his revelation by degrees. He found himself fidgeting nervously and casting sidelong glances at the thinly bound manuscript. What Geoffrey feared, but would not consciously admit, was that it seemed as if the epiphany had discovered him, rather than the other way around, in irrational and paranoid fear, to be certain, but one that would not leave his mind. And when, after word of his theory leaked to the media, and they pronounced it the death of modern philosophy, Geoffrey J. Armain walked off the end of a very long pier one night, and never surfaced again. The late Geoffrey J. Armain's revelation, which I will not elaborate upon with the same grotesque detail that he put forth, was not a terrible dictum that disproved the existence of God, or cast doubt on the essential unity universe. In a certain light, it almost seems reassuring, beneficent. It is reflection and doubt that make it disturbing and frightening. The scope of our senseless legacy of war is drawn into all the sharper relief. Geoffrey J. Armain's realization, devoid of those proofs and justifications that thrilled and horrified, was just this: no man dies without a purpose. Death is so much more than the end of a single life. It is the very fuel upon which all things are built. We are not cogs in the juggernaut of history. We are the grease between its gears. The third story. DY at LOV bus incident. In the winter of 1959, 9 university students died mysteriously while hiking in the Ural Mountains located in the former Soviet Union. Details never leaked out to the public until well after the fall of the Iron Curtain due to the unusual circumstances contained in the report. The bodies of the hikers were found not far from their camp, which had been nearly destroyed. Investigators followed footprints to what looked to be the site of a small bonfire, and the first 2 bodies, inexplicably, they were clad only in their underwear. Despite the bitter Russian winter, it was as if some force drove them from their camp before they could even dress. 3 more were found in another location, looking as if they were trying to return to their doomed camp after their companions succumbed to hypothermia. None of the bodies were at rest for winter, some without even shoes, and others with only strips of cloth on their feet torn from the clothing of the already dead. If the circumstances were unusual, the autopsy proved to be completely bizarre. One of the students had major fractures to his skull, and another had their ribs completely smashed. No external wounds or trauma were found. Medical experts compared the injuries to a high-speed car crash, stating It would be impossible for another human being to create of that type without an external wound. Another camper, a young woman, had her tongue missing while investigators initially suspected foul play. No footprints were found near any of the bodies other than the students. Adding to the mystery, the bodies were all shown to have high levels of radioactive contamination. 9 years after the incident, in the Ural Mountains, another group of hikers were found dead. This time, in the Caucasus. The incident occurred in late summer this time. However, many similarities were present. The hikers' campsite was found destroyed and the campers were forced to flee with little or no provisions, rather than being spread out. The bodies were all found within a dozen yards of each other in a nearby clearing. The scene was described as horrifying. By police, the bodies were positioned as if thrown at great speed, and postured as if their bones and bashed to splinters. The results of the medical investigation were immediately sealed by the Soviet government. Again, each of the 6 bodies presented high doses of radiation, despite a normal background radiation level near the site of the deaths. During autopsy, the medical examiner discovered that the initial description of the hikers' bones being smashed was incorrect. Their entire skeletal structures were missing, despite having no external wounding whatsoever. High levels of calcium and other nutrients were found in their blood and surrounding tissues. It was as if something had somehow rapidly liquefied the victims. Bones crime scene photos also revealed the clearing that the bodies were found. It was not natural. Topographic maps taken only months before had shown the area to be a lush forest. Entire trees were smashed to splinters in a path more than 20 meters wide and over a 200-meter area. Despite the Soviet crackdown on all information, it eventually leaked out, as all such information does. Leading occult experts have gathered all available facts and came to a single, terrifying conclusion. No man or man-made device could have acted with such deliberate force in the ways uncovered. Of all research available, only one entity could have been responsible. Something that was not meant for our Earth. Something that struck fear into the heart of a certain insane Arab.